but also going to be touching on squad working as well. Quite often, the two terms are used quite frequently, and we thought it would be a good idea to have a conversation with Perry, who understands both concepts really well, but also uses them in his day-to-day work. So I think it's a real privilege, Perry, to have you on the webinar with us. And just for those colleagues that don't know Perry, he's the founder and chief energy officer of Perry Timms HR, which is an 8-person squad, which again, we can talk about that later on. And Perry, you've written a book on transformational HR, which we've certainly had a look at, and there it is. Little
this
plug.
one, you mean?
But also, I think there's quite a lot of what you're doing is in our interest, especially now we have to work remotely and we have to work digitally. So let's have a conversation, see where we go. And just for colleagues who are joining us today, we are going to be recording this. And based on our performance, we might be able to put this out to a wider audience. Let's see, who knows. I've got colleagues from the Northwest Employers team who are on the webinar, but specifically, if you have a question, Pat will be highlighting them to me. And also, if there's any questions that my own team have of me, you can PM me. There is a dial-in as well, which if people can't, for whatever reason, access this particular feed, but if for whatever reason you drop out, we will be sharing everything back. And also, just for colleagues that are not aware, we do a weekly HR webinar, which also gets shared and recorded. So this will follow in the same sort of fashion. So expect to see the recording on Basecamp and other platforms. Right then, Perry. So where should we start then? Should we start with Agile? So
yeah, let's share screen, and then we don't have to be distracted by any pets coming into the screen or children or stuff like that, as happens here. Yes,
got all of those things.
With Agile. Yeah, we can start with Agile. So a little tiny bit about my background. I've got a public sector background. I spent 21 years working in central government at what's now the Ministry of Justice. And I worked on technology projects in the 1990s, and so I've been interested in tech ever since then. But I found my way into HR around about 2003, working in learning and development and organisation development. And of course, learning and organisation development have got lots of theories and models and tools. And some of them are great and some of them aren't so great. But because of my link to technology, I got very interested in things like Agile and Scrum. So my story with this goes back probably about 10 plus years, with interest in this as a way of working, and also teams that are very self-managed and don't have the normal hierarchy and bureaucracy. So that's where I come from, and that's how I've discovered it. And what I've done is I've applied what is, I guess, a method and an approach that's called Agile, and brought it into not digital technology environments. And so I think the first slide hopefully will give you a sense of a bit of the methodology behind it. We can track this back to continuous improvement practices in industry in the 1980s and 1990s, things like Lean and Six Sigma, Kaizen, that continuous improvement type of agenda. And so it comes from that. It comes from people wanting to constantly improve something in a production or a service-oriented process. And so this diagram shows you the difference between how that used to be done, which is the bottom part of the screen. Hopefully you can see it, with discovery, design, develop, and test, what's often called waterfall. And then the little loops at the top of the screen, which are smaller versions of a process that builds things in stages and increments, or in this case, sprint. And so this starts to give us the chance to talk about the first definition, I suppose you'd say, of Agile, because a lot of people say, oh yeah, Agile, I'm Agile. And I say, oh, how's that then? And they say, I hot desk, I work from home, I'm remote. We're all having to do that now. So I often call that Agile with a little a. Because you are being agile, you're not in the same place, you're having to adapt to your surroundings, your work comes with you rather than you go to the workplace. So that is a version of Agile. But
Well, Perry, surely isn't this all like tech driven? Isn't it? Don't you have to be like a Google or something like that for this to be real?
so that's kind of where that fits in. You're right. So the technologists who were building these products and services in this waterfall method found it was too slow, that the products at the end of it didn't quite do what it wanted to do. So I've got lots of experience where things weren't quite as they intended, and to break that cycle, they created Agile in the top part of this diagram with these smaller sprints. So yes, you're right, Cash, it did originate in technology industries, in digital, and it did get famous with companies like Google and EA Sports and all of those technological organizations. But I've often said it's too good a methodology to leave to the technologists, because it's a brilliant way of breaking things down into smaller stages to show progress, to test the product as you're building it rather than just at the end of the cycle. So so I think it's now no longer a technologist's kind of best kept secret. It's now more a deployable method for solving problems, raising to challenges and exploiting opportunities. So that's one of the myths we can bust, Cash, is it's not just for the techies.
Okay, and in terms of how, because if you look at the waterfall method and if you look at the Agile method, you know, one feels really sort of hierarchical, doesn't it? Very much top down thing. So, you know, and in some of the work we do in OD, it's almost you first you discover, then you design, and then you've got the Agile method, which feels quite untidy. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think on first impression, you'll think how orderly waterfall is, because each part has its very distinct phase. And so everybody knows exactly what they're doing in those phases. And then that would be how you would tackle something like a big change that you had to introduce into an organization. And then you'd look at Agile and go, well, it feels like it's just lots of little things that come together. How can that then have the same impact as something that's as big as a massive program? Yeah. And so what Agile does is, you're right, it'll take it away from hierarchical control, and it will give that accountability to those small teams to aggregate their efforts and build it gradually, still having the same outcome. So Agile is used in huge projects as much as the waterfall method is. It just has multiple teams working on different streams of activity, and then all brought together with the final kind of product or solution. So it might look messy, it might look like it's got risks associated with it because it isn't tightly controlled, but it's more creative and adaptive and fluid, so it can be more responsive to changes and different demands. I'd say that's the best kind of summary I could give you on that.
And also, I think it almost feels quite risky as well, doesn't it? I mean, we'll get on we'll get on to how do you manage and mitigate risk, but just again, that there's just something that you said there. So the top-down methodology, you know, you almost need a hierarchy to deliver the waterfall method, and you know, this is where the word squad comes in, doesn't it? So the squad is what you need to deliver the Agile method. And you know, for colleagues that are aware, Northwest Employers, we have this offer document, and in there it's got squad working, and we've described it as a pacey way of working that brings together small, flexible teams to work on an issue or an idea. So it feels very different, that does, from the way that we're used to working, doesn't it? So just tell us a little bit about that, please, Perry.
Yeah, and I think this diagram kind of represents it really. So in waterfall or traditional projects, you often have a project manager who is a team leader, who's the figure there in blue on the screen, and then you have the other people who make up the project team. And of course, in a program, you could have lots of projects with lots of project managers all doing their own part of it. So it isn't just as simple as on that screen, but that tends to be the way it goes. That project manager has accountability, reporting responsibility, they're risk managing, they're producing logs, they're filling in documents. And in fact, they are almost like a one-person bureaucracy who is also trying to help that team of people underneath by leading them, by allocating priorities, by checking any sort of blockages or issues. And that's quite a lot to ask for one person, and often project managers would describe themselves as overworked and very kind of pulled by different demands. Now, the Agile team that you just described, Cash, the squad, is very different. So actually, you do have somebody who has a leading role, and that's the person in the green, but they're more a facilitator than a project manager. So they don't get involved in lots and lots of administration. They are there to service the people and the process. rather than be the logjam or the lead or the governing deciding force. So the clue is in the other people that have got blue coloration on this diagram is that they are all themselves their own project managers. They are project managing a workload that they are doing as part of that team's responsibility. High levels of communication across people, high levels of collaboration where people help each other out much more. So it's much more organic and natural, and you're right, it's not hierarchical and very sort of boxed in. It's much more responsive and adaptable, and people have accountability and responsibility rather than it all falling to the project manager. And I think that's the first distinct difference as you've described it. It's less hierarchical, less blocked and controlled by one person, and more a collective responsibility with a facilitator or a coach. So that's where squads come in.
And just as you were talking there, Perry, I think that there's almost if you look at the blue person on the left and the green person on the right, those are two very different types of leadership skills, aren't they? So we're not talking about we're not talking top down. We're not talking sort of management by tasks here, are we?
No, you're not, because the management by task in the agile environment is being done by each individual and facilitated by the person in the green, the coach. And so there's a clue in the title there. They're not dominating proceedings and directing all the effort. They are coaching and facilitating and guiding and enabling people to work at a kind of an optimum pace and with levels of creativity and so on. It doesn't mean it's not decisive though, because you've got this one person in the project management role on the left. You think, well, all decisions get taken by them, so therefore that's consistent and there's only one person who can tick it off. But what if you're one of these people here all queuing to get a decision from that person? It can really slow things down. Whereas in the agile team environment, you collectively will make decisions, so you don't have to refer to a project manager. So in fact, this green figure here, the coach, rarely makes a decision. They help facilitate the group coming to a decision. And again, you might think, well, that's surely slower, but it's definitely no slower. And in fact, it's proven to be quicker than the log jam that becomes this project manager. So yeah, the hierarchical sort of removal does feel a bit risky, but actually it allows people to be more accountable. It allows them to have more say over the outcome of their work. So it's quite fulfilling for people to work in this way rather than just be part of a machine.
And then the other sort of point I want to make is that the little people on the left-hand side who are in the hierarchy, they see themselves as subordinates, don't they? And it's so there's almost a mindset difference between seeing yourself as a subordinate and a bit like the language that you just described as a junior project manager and enabler. So again, when quite often when we're thinking about development for these people or developing new ways of working, we often miss the people that need to do the work. So that again, that's a little insight just from this conversation for me.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose I look at it that, this one person trying to coordinate the work of the 7 people in their project team versus all of the project team coordinating on behalf of each other feels like it's got a lot more chance of speed, success, creativity, adaptability, because it isn't all being forced into one person's funnel. So, if you're on that project team on the left and you've got a slightly overworked and dysfunctional project manager, the whole project's likely to fail. But if you're working on the right and one of the team is having an off day, then normally the rest of the team are all pulling together. You don't have those dips that you experience with a bit of ineffective work performance. So that's a dynamic I've seen quite a lot. It's like a real camaraderie, team spirit on the right, and a very traditional wait until I'm told what to do on the left.
So thinking about the current situation, Perry, that we're in, so we're all locked down, we're all working from home, we're all trying to use, we've got people on Zoom, we've got 32 people, which is fantastic actually, on Zoom. So what, there's almost an agile with a small a, as you described it, and an agile with a big A, as we see it. So talk about that, and actually it's almost, you described homework, people describe homeworking as agile.
Yes.
What is it? It's just traditional teams working from home.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I keep that diagram up, what we're seeing right
Yeah.
now is that people are using a dispersed method to manage a project like this. You've got people on the left as a project manager who no longer can share the same space as their team and just walk around and check how things are, occupying lots of time on video calls, sending lots of emails, filling in lots of forms and charts. So we've not been very agile on that, because all we've done is we've replaced existing practices and methods and processes that we used to do in a space but dispersed, and actually made it perhaps a little bit more difficult. So that to me doesn't feel very agile. It just feels like you've got remote people working in different places. So the mindset really is to make that a much more collective shared responsibility, so that we don't add any unnecessary kind of tasks and bureaucracy and decision making and delays by having people work on their own steam and manage themselves, but connect and coordinate with their team in a way that's probably a little bit more like the principle that I've become known to sort of follow, which is working out loud, where instead of having all your work like in an inbox or on a to-do list on a pad in front of you that nobody else can see, all the work is done in a space like Microsoft Teams, for example, so people can see who's doing what at any given time, who might need some help, and you can use that kind of channel to create a bit more agility by having people self kind of report what their priorities are, what their challenges are, and people come and help them out in that space. So you'll find a lot of teams that are in traditional projects spend a lot of time in meetings, but teams who are agile don't necessarily have to do that. They have very short connecting check-in type meetings at the beginning of the day where people say, what are you going to do today, who needs any help, and so on. And they're often called stand-ups, because in the physical world where we could be in close proximity to each other, you do that in the corner of the room, write on a whiteboard, work out who's doing what, and off people then go and work. So that would be a great example where an agile team could spend 15 minutes on a Zoom call just exchanging what their tasks are for the day, what their outcomes are likely to be, do a little bit of calibration, offer some help, and then just disperse and kind of do the work. And if you need to chat, you can use something like Microsoft Teams or something, rather than sending lots of emails and spreadsheets to fill in. So I think that's what I would call agile, is where we are working under our own steam, we are clear on what we're doing, and you don't need managing too much in order to do that.
I think just listening to you there, Perry, I think because technology is moving so rapidly, what I find is we're quite often baffled by the amount of technology that's around us, and the first hurdle is trying to get your head around what the technology is for. So give you Microsoft Teams as an example. You know, the just creating that HR webinar was almost a right, guys, leap of faith time. Let's do it. Let's put it out there. Real leap of and actually everything's okay. You know, we didn't break anything. We didn't break anyone. And I think there is a bit around how do you make sense of all of that tech out there, but then how could you make it purposeful for what you need to do? Because actually, looking at the diagram on the left, the traditional teams bit, and looking at how an agile squad, for example, works, there's quite a lot for us to unlearn here. It's almost we've all learned to work in a way that means that's how we're rewarded, how we see ourselves as successful in an organization or a team. But what you're asking us to do perhaps is a bit more, I'd say, the scary box.
Yeah, I'd say so too. And but I think we should give ourselves credit, because you're right about the COVID-19 responses. I mean, not just, you know, an example is the building and the fitting out of Manchester Central to now become a Nightingale Hospital. I cannot imagine that was done by lots of project managers having lots of people waiting to be told what to do. I can imagine that was an incredibly squad-related agile exercise where people were given guidance, but they were experts in wiring and sanitation and they were tasked with doing their bit. So somebody coordinated the whole scheme. Clearly, you wouldn't just randomly say turn that building into a hospital, but you equally wouldn't overmanage it either, because you wouldn't have the time to do it. And you're almost insulting people who've got expertise and energy and creativity to create those solutions. So I think we're seeing it happen. I guess people wouldn't necessarily name it that that's what they were doing. And that happens quite a lot. People are often working in an agile way by breaking things down into those manageable cycles I showed you on the other screen. They just don't know that that's an agile technique. Exactly that.
Yeah. So Perry, I just want to invite a bit of a pause now, because you know, we've covered a lot of ground there. We've gone through sort of, you know, the difference between a traditional team and an agile team, and we've also gone through what's described as the waterfall method. And you know, I'm sure there's people on the webinar today that have been on Prince 2 and
Prince 2,
and try to apply it in the real world and think, oh my God, this doesn't really work in the real world unless it's a really tightly managed project. But just everyone else that's on the webinar, and any points of reflection, questions, I'll give you like a minute or two for people if you want to come in, unmute yourself and off you go. Okay.
So far,
I'm guessing people are okay. So, yep.
Great.
Are we? I'm guessing we're happy to move on then.
Yeah, and I think where I'd like to take it now is going back to this diagram with these sprints. I mean, that's the first kind of language shift we're starting to see, right? So you don't call them phases or stages, you call them sprints. And so what the technology world did when they wanted to separate themselves from a waterfall method to a new agile method is they came up with a whole new frame of language. And that wasn't to be, you know, kind of trendy, or that wasn't to create confusion. They wanted to create a mental separation in their developers and designers and creators from a previous method. So they created a new language. So you would talk sprints, you wouldn't talk stages. And it's a deliberate attempt actually as well to consider the pace that people need to work at. And so when you think sprint, you don't think long drawn out process, do you? You think quick, you think really high impact and high energy, and that's exactly what happens. But I'm going to show you another slide now with some of the other language that you might see in and around an agile kind of environment, just to give you a sense and unpack this a little bit about how you can differentiate yourself from working in a traditional way and working in an agile way. So sprints is the first one. So when we start to think about how we separate out the chunks of activity in a project or a problem, and so that might be that you've got something in your local area that you've got to deliver. Let's say that you've got to, create a new schooling rota for key workers. And so that means you've got to bring together a lot of information. You've got to find a lot of teachers who can remove themselves from isolation to go do the teaching bit. It's all got to be transportation linked and so on. There are lots of things to consider in that solution. So what you do is you would think, what are the stages we need in order to establish this? Well, there's an information gathering stage, there's a building research stage, and there's a transport connection stage, and you could do them all in what's called sprints. And the way that those sprints then are built is that you are looking at a series of tasks or activities which are categorized on this pink one in the middle that's called a product backlog. Now, again, this is another term that's been introduced by the techies, I think, deliberately to create a sense of urgency and activity, because it's a list of all the tasks and activities that you need to do to an intricate level that will get you from the problem being identified and the solution being ready to deliver. So that's why Post-it notes are often associated with Agile, because people quite literally list every single task on a Post-it note, put it up on a massive wall, and then try and organize them into like-minded clusters, interdependencies from one thing to another, tasks that can run concurrently, tasks that need expertise, tasks that can be done really quickly now, that kind of thing. So we create our sprints by having a backlog of tasks that help us chunk the activity into that sort of timeline sequence.
Perry, as you were describing, I've noticed there's a couple of questions that have flown in.
Oh yeah, cool.
One is around trust, and it's a good question actually. It says Agile is based a lot on trust.
Yes.
Is that often a blockage from moving from a traditional top-down control hierarchical to a
yeah.
interesting.
I mean, I won't paint a picture that everybody suddenly goes, "What, you're going to do Agile? Great. Where do I sign?" Because there are some people that are very skeptical about it. There are some people who think it's not appropriate for the kind of work that perhaps gets done in local government. But I've worked with several metropolitan borough councils and city councils who have had leadership there who are willing to experiment. And I'd say that if there are people who are objecting to working in this way, then obviously there's a conversation to be had about why that is. And I think in order to enter into that conversation, you've got to be a lot clearer about what you think Agile is going to deliver and create for you as a benefit. And that's where I come in sometimes as an advisor and can help people create that case that's really compelling, that allows people to perhaps get over a little bit of uncomfortableness or perhaps a little bit of risk aversion and so on. So yeah, I mean, I've seen it work in sensitive areas like children's care. I've seen it work in legal. So I've seen it work in areas where actually people would say, well, you can't do it there. And people have been able to find a way. My technique and tactic is often to find enough people who want to try this out, find a piece of work where somebody can allow you to experiment with this technique, use it, learn as you're doing it, and then analyze the impact, the savings, the quality of the product, the inclusivity, the energy you created. And then I think if you can then show the business case that says, so if we did a lot more work like this, we would do something like 4 times the speed from start to finish, then I think that's very difficult for leaders to resist you doing. And in fact, with the work I did at Salford City Council, that's pretty much what happened. They were finding like a 4x saving on time from start to finish, on how much people needed to apply themselves, but also a better product. So yes, you will hit resistance, and yes, it does need some trust. I will absolutely not deny that. But don't let that be the thing that stops you starting and experimenting.
And then just another question as you were covering that one. Again, it's linked. It's about how do you manage documentation for reporting purposes to senior managers?
Okay. Yeah, so the short answer is you don't, and that sounds really flippant, but what we've introduced are a lot of management checks and controls that in certain circumstances are simply a safety net for managers to assure themselves their teams are being productive. Now, if you're working on an Agile project, your work is visible to everybody. That means the things you're doing, the documents you're producing, the research reports you've curated, and so on. So I think we will say to anybody who wants reports, we'll say, well, we're not going to give you a report, but you can check in at any time on our sort of timeline and see where we're at. And if there's any trouble we're experiencing where we're not going to hit deadlines, we'll come to you and say, we're struggling, we can't meet this deadline. So I think we flip the reporting. So we say to people, if you want the report, you can come and get it from us. But rest assured that if we feel like we're going to struggle, we'll come to you and manage it as an exception. And again, it's a massive leap of faith, don't get me wrong, but I would hate that a benefit of working this way would be simply removed by somebody insisting on a bureaucracy, which actually you probably don't even need. I've used red, amber, green reports a lot, and lots of people report green on them, and they're not really green, but it's an illusion, and they're comfortable with that illusion. I think blow it up and get people to come to you if they want to see how you're doing.
Is it as well? Just thinking about it, there's something about purpose, isn't there? So if it's something that is of a like currently, you know, there's quite a lot of, I would say, very, very purposeful work going on, and the only way to sort of, you know, cut through all of the red tape is to work in this way, I guess. And it's almost what. Just listening to you there, Perry, there's something about how important the project is to either the organisation or the service, and actually it's not really a project, is it? Doesn't the language that you're sharing with us isn't project language?
No, it's not, and you're right to do that. So I think where people can find Agile useful is when they use it in a project, but it isn't. It can be for any task and finish problem-solving initiative that you've got. because agile can be something you can apply in that environment and just change the dynamic of how you'd normally do it. So instead of having a focus group, you have a sprint that's related to research, and it can still be part of an agile construct. You do it with more sort of, I suppose, sharp focus. You do it with shared accountability. You do it quicker. You do it more creative, and you don't spend all your time planning it. You plan it as you're going along. And I think, I've got lots and lots of hours under my belt of producing Gantt charts that took me ages that nobody ever looked at ever again. And so I'm kind of thinking all that project effort was wasted when I could have been doing things that helped the solution come out the other end. And I think somebody in the NHS actually said to me that the project methodology is not the thing. The project methodology is there to deliver a thing, but the methodology isn't the thing. Do you know what I mean? So I think there's definitely some opportunities to thin out your bureaucracy, to ease up on some of your own imposed processes, and do it safely and collectively, but in this fashion.
Yeah, and a lot of, as you're talking here, a lot of this doesn't feel very safe. And even for example, we were sharing as a team earlier, the fact that we were doing this feels very public, and it's quite a challenging. Yeah. It's a challenging mindset to find yourself in. But also, I think that there is something about, again, going back to your documentation piece around governance. And so what you're saying is that agile projects require less governance. How would you approach that kind of, as somebody perhaps in charge of a program?
Yeah.
What would you do? And how would you do it?
So I would say actually agile projects have light touch governance. They definitely connect to your governance machinery. So if you do have to have some kind of reporting mechanism, then you just build it into your product backlog that somebody on the team will still produce that report. Don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting you can abscond and abstain from absolutely everything, because if governance is there for a really good reason. One example is budget spend, right? So let's look at that. So you often have a big project and you think, hang on, this is a tens of thousands of pounds worth of project spend here, and you spend hours and hours justifying that spend, rightly so, because it's public money, when actually what you could do is you could put in a case to say, can we just have a small amount of money to spend on the initial concept to really truly understand how much money we need to spend and how much money we're going to get. So almost like in the investment side of technology, the seed funding that gets you going. And so you could even do your budget in a very responsible way, if not even more responsible way, by saying we'll do an agile piece to get us to the point where we absolutely know how much we need to spend on this project. And we will give you an evidence-based report that says exactly how much we need. So we don't want to hijack the fund now, but we don't want you to spend it somewhere else. Just give us a tiny bit to try and secure what we need. I can't see anything wrong in that kind of governance. Do you know what I mean? It's still being very responsible, but it's not following the old illusion that the processes we have now are optimal and best and safest, because I don't think they are. I think we kind of just get used to them.
So I'm just going to invite a colleague who has asked a question. I only see, unfortunately, colleagues, I can only see the nickname that you've given yourself. So, so I don't know, whoever Rigby, is it Rigby Street? I don't know if you can ask the question.
Yeah, sure. It's Steve Rigby.
Hi, Steve.
Hi, from St Helens. What's obvious is that you need the right culture within the organisation to accept this new way of working. And from what I understand of working in an agile manner, there can be a lot of errors and mistakes that happen, and that's actually vital to agile working. So really my question was around the ability to, and you may have come across this in councils, get that right culture in place. And kind of tips to move that on.
So I think you raise a brilliant point, which is that a lot of people will say, because you break Agile down into those small chunks, you can see more, I suppose, obviously, where things don't work. And bizarrely, that's part of the point of it, really, is that in a nice, safe space, before you release a new solution or policy or whatever it is, you make those mistakes in a place where you can contain them and make them safely, but learn from them. So again, I challenge the myth that the existing methods are absolutely foolproof, because I don't think they are, but they don't get revealed until there's a disaster at the end of it, and then somebody has to put it right, and then you say, well, where did that happen? Well, it happened there. It's like, well, let's not do that again. Whereas actually Agile stops you from doing that. Before you go out the door with a product, you have normally tested it to the point that you've then adapted it and changed it, so it's likely to have a smoother delivery pathway. I mean, it's not in the council world, it's in the technology world, but there's a company I've researched that's done so much on this that they've never had a software failure in 15 years of operating. So, you know, it's the opposite of risky, actually, in my view, because you contain the risk in those small cycles. Now, again, if culturally people are saying, yeah, but I don't believe it, I don't think it's going to do that, yet they've got no experience of it, then the only way to do it is to say, well, let's give us a small project to start with, just to find our feet with it, just to prove whether there are any weaknesses, and you be part of it and you help us with it, because then if you need convincing to open the door to this, then you'll see it firsthand. And so, you know, I can't think of anything more convincing than actually being part of something that proves that point. So yeah, that's one tactic. If culturally the whole organization is not at all wanting to go down this route, that's a really hard turning point to do. My experience is you normally find a small group of people who will want to experiment, and I'd spend time finding something safe, proving it, doing it a little bit under the radar, get your evidence, and then go over the radar and then say to people, look, we tried this out, it was a bit of a gamble, but we managed all the risks, we proved this, and now we think culturally we should start to adopt some of these techniques. So start small and try it out is the only thing I'd say there, and that's almost a principle of Agile anyway.
All right, thank you.
Hope that helps.
Yeah.
Just another comment that's come in, and I've asked Andrea if she can tell us a little bit more. It's almost the governance question answered, isn't it, Andrea? Are you able to unmute and tell us a bit about how you do that in Oldham?
Yeah, so in Oldham we have quite a few boards where you know, they like you to take papers to them before starting anything new, kind of get that senior stakeholder management sign off. And so I was thinking more, because I've worked in this environment before, but it was a very different organisation. It was a private company, very fast paced, and Agile just works really, really well for us. But what I can see is possibly in Oldham for this to take place after that governance. So I can't see us shifting very quickly from a kind of crack on and just come to us if you've got any problems. But I can see maybe, you know, once we've had that initial sign off and senior management have put their thoughts forward and given some suggestions and ideas, once they feel comfortable that the right people are working together and that they've given their initial sign off, I can see Agile working then for councils.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I think what you've got then is the outcome and the purpose of a piece of work is agreed on by people who know how much it's going to cost and what it needs to deliver. And then actually they say the method for delivering it is then something that you could take with our you know, strong steer of what it needs to look like. How you get there could be in an Agile way. So yeah, I think you've provided the first, you know, really strong link then between a traditional purposeful governance structure and then something that delivers it in a more nimble and creative and adaptable way. And so I think that's then kind of optimizing like council resources in how you get it from that concept, that approval, to the actual delivery. So I'm pretty sure that governance board then would create something like a structure that could then be the guiding force throughout it. And what you don't see on this diagram, but let me just shift ahead to this one. You get somebody who, if you see in that first box, problem identified, that's where I think you're talking about the governance side of things would kick in. There's a problem, somebody puts a paper together and says, we've got to solve this, here's what we need. The board committee sign it off. Now, what often happens is there's then a project board convened, which has often, 7, 8, I've even seen 30 people on it. And I mean, it's just ridiculous bureaucracy. What this process recommends is that one person says, okay, I'm going to be responsible for the operational delivery of that particular initiative. I'm going to be the product owner. And so you only need to come to me with decisions. And if I feel I need to talk to my committee that I'm part of, I'll do that. But day to day, week by week, I'll be the one who can help you remove blockages, adapt the plan, that kind of thing. So already I think we could see an efficiency that would come in that way.
And Andrea, just so once that bit's done, I'm guessing the rest of it just flows into agile delivery, does it? Just again, how are you finding it compared to private sector?
I suppose it's the speed, it's the pace really, isn't it? So we talk about sprints at the beginning. I think it's just being very realistic with your time frames. When I've worked previously in Agile in the private sector, we did work at a very fast pace. You would be looking at turnaround in weeks, whereas a lot of the projects I'm working on with the council now, you are looking at months. So I think as long as you're realistic and just try and cut some of that governance out, if you can get it all done at the start, that could speed things up a little bit.
Great.
Andrea, thank you so much for that question. Really powerful stuff. So it's almost, so Perry, in terms of this then, there's almost, once we go to the parameters of the work that it is, and the outcome and the purpose are really clear, you get on with it. So mindful of this slide then, just talk us through some of the language, because again, there's a couple of things in there that I want to myth Scrum.
So a couple of things we can myth bust on here. So once we've got the problem identified and somebody says, right, I'm going to own that product, that's the first language change we've seen, because we would talk about a policy or an initiative or something, but in the sort of agile and squad kind of world, we call it a product, because it's something that people need to use, and that product could be guidance, a rota, a new piece of legislation, whatever it might be, but it's a product. It has features and it has things that people need access and do something with, and then that creates the kind of action or the impact that you want. And once you've got that product identified, that's when the Agile, Scrum or Squad come into play. Now, what I think is really useful to know here is that we don't select, let's get somebody from finance and from resourcing and from research. We don't pick people to come onto a squad or a scrum. What we do is we socialize the problem and say, look, we need this new rota for teaching, key workers' children. And then people who are interested in working on that are normally the ones who are going to put the most energy towards it and help you get there in that quick way that Angela just described. So we break all the rules on this one, and we ask people to come in if they want to step into this environment. And straight away people go, yeah, but what about the expertise? It's like often there is so much like administration and activity, you're almost underusing expertise if you've got an expert who's doing all that kind of stuff. So you could use the expert as a resource to bring in when you need it. But my experience is you get people who want to solve that problem, and you will solve that problem. So that creates a little bit of an issue in selection, but equally not, because you get diversity quite naturally, you get people who've been left out of things, and genuinely you get people with the right intent. I want to come here because I want to make this work good. That almost seems to me like the starting point. So I'll shut up there if there's any thoughts.
That's fine. I think I'm going to invite Matt to ask you a question.
Okay, cool.
Floor is yours, Matt.
Oh, hiya. You okay?
Yeah, good.
Yeah,
perfect. So as it is a positive psychology question, the opposite, does it go wrong?
Agile, does it go wrong?
So I'm just thinking, and when does it go wrong? Because I'm thinking in my head, I'm thinking from a personal perspective, I'm quite chaotic in terms of the way that I work, so this is perfect for me because I don't need to record stuff. But then there are benefits of me forcing myself to use standard project management ways of doing things. That makes sense.
So the good news is if you if you want to still do that in Agile, you can still do that. So, you know, if you like to produce, you know, I'll get a bit jargony here, a product definition or a service level agreement, you can do all that. You don't have to stop doing those things just because you're working in an Agile way. You don't have to completely drop all the good things that you have found work for you. The difference is you're not accountable to a project manager anymore. You're accountable to your colleagues. So if you're spending lots of time doing something that's not helping your product get delivered just because you like doing it, the rest of your team are going to say, Matt, hang on a minute, you've been spending like all week on one deliverable and we've done all the other backlog. Play the game. So there's a bit of peer pressure in a good way that often goes on here. But to your point about where does it go wrong, it can go wrong because people who perhaps aren't quite as motivated by their own self sort of determination can find this a difficult environment because they're not being told what to do. So they can sit back a bit and not participate enough. So that can happen. And it is a definite sort of conditioning and risk aspect. But like I say, normally the visibility of the work and the team's kind of, I guess, unity and almost pressure can mitigate against that, but it's one to watch out for. It can get a little bit ambitious, talking to Angela's point about pace, in that you try and do things so quickly, you end up sort of doing things just to get it in on a particular deadline, and that doesn't do anybody any favors. So I think you have to be pretty honest about the time it will take you and how long your sprints need to be, for example. Where else does it go wrong? It goes wrong because there's interference from the rest of the organization because they don't trust you to get on with it. So that's talking to the point I mentioned earlier. So they say, yes, work Agile, but also do these bureaucracies and this and this and this, which kind of stifles the whole reason to be creative and adaptive.
It's almost like a different, it's almost like a culture within a,
yeah,
you have to have enough of the right culture around Agile for it to work.
Yeah, you do. You absolutely
and
do. Yeah,
it's almost like, and again, you know, a helpful question there from a colleague. It's almost the current cabinet situation, Perry.
Yeah.
National government situation.
Yeah.
I reckon they're being agile.
Well, I think they're having to be because, you know, the project manager is currently in hospital. And so the team are having to say, well, let's divide this amongst us and let's work on it in that sort of self-directed fashion. So I guess they are, yeah. And the example I talked about earlier on with the hospitals, the Nightingale refits, but also I'm seeing community group action where there is no project, there is no brief, but people are getting from a problem to a solution because they're all communicating, they're all sharing some responsibility. But it can go wrong. Yeah, it can. The one thing I will say about Agile is when it goes wrong, it's often less of a disaster than those over-managed things that can still go wrong, because it's pretty quickly clear that if this stuff isn't working, what you can do to pivot and change and adapt and pull the plug and all that kind of stuff. So my experience of it is, unless it's being badly implemented and it's not really Agile, I've not seen it not work. I've seen it kind of perhaps not quite realise what people's ambitions were, but that's mainly because their ambitions were perhaps a little bit too perhaps imaginative. Generally, I see this as changing how people work. Yeah.
Interestingly, yesterday there was a discussion about you know, who should be, you know, in the cabinet situation, who is the delegated project manager, which is kind of the hierarchical, it's you next. But then the question that was being asked was, well, who's got the most experience? And there's, again, I'm writing things down as we go through this webinar. It's about how do you create the squad. So going back to the governance piece around you know, outcome purpose building, you know, a lot of our organizations and sector works in a very particular way, and actually quite often you don't have everybody that you might need on that squad. And also, if you think about how people are perceiving their own roles, or what you're asking is what we call distributed leaders, essentially. Versus you know, people who are just given a task and they just do that task. So quite a lot there. Just Perry, mindful of time as well. Just looking at the clock there, we've got about 10 minutes. I think if we could spend a little bit of time on how do you, it's almost recontract, it's almost doing that in a safe and rigorous way. I think we've done a little bit of that, and we have, and getting people to almost let you have a go at something, and for that piece
I think
of
so.
to be safe enough to have a go at. But could, in terms of your diagram here, is there anything that you think we still need to myth bust on this? So is a scrum the same thing as a squad?
Yeah, pretty much it is. I mean, in the technical world, they'll have a slightly different remit to a squad, but it's not that different that we need to worry about it. You can call yourself a scrum or a squad, whatever you want to do. You're an agile team, and if you're operating in this fashion, that's just giving you a sense of identity. There is one important thing on here, Cash, and it's that other one at the bottom, which is about our users and our stakeholders. This, who are we solving the problem for? And this is where Agile, I think, has a little bit of magic, because during the build process, what you don't do with Agile is you don't say, right, this is for the citizens of Stockport or whatever. You start to bring to the thought process different types of persona or images of who those people are, so that you build it for, Mrs. Harris, who's 72, who hasn't got any people living nearby who are family. She has a really good neighbour, and you sort of characterize those people. And then when you start to build your solution, you are saying, is Mrs. Harris able to use this solution without any intervention? And if so, how can we make sure that happens? Or do we need to provide some form of intervention for her? I'm only using that as an illustration. So it obsesses about the users of your product. Now, again, in all the experiences I've got of doing this, I did it in learning and in HR and OD and stuff. This is the bit that gets people going, oh, why didn't we do it like this before? Some people use persona mapping, some people do have some archetypes and so on, but actually this is the most powerful thing. You tell the story of how a person out there is going to use this product or solution, and it completely changes the nature of the quality and the product, the features, the tasks, the things you do. So I think that's where it's got its most powerful kind of factor, is that it's an empathy-led, human-based design process, and that's why I think it's too good for techies, because this is people's lives, and we could bring together some really strong, powerful things if we start to adopt that kind of philosophy. So that's the only thing I wanted to say on top of it.
A question's just to come in, which links to that. Do you want to ask the question, Pat? No. So the question is around persona mapping, archetyping. So what you're saying, Perry, is when we, because we work quite a lot with, well, mostly with local government. When you do that persona mapping, I'm guessing that then encourages what we call multi-agency working, place-based working, system work. That language that we use so often. It enables that language to become real, doesn't it?
I think so, because you stop the sort of high-level generic categories that you put onto people who are going to be the users of your product or your service, and you start thinking very intricately about their lives, what influences them, where they go, who they speak to, and you start to think about how you can meet their need in a different way. And that's the place-based, multi-agency stuff. I think that if we bring that into the design process, I think we'll have a lot better take up and utilization and impact of council-led services. So that's where I think Salford have done some terrific work as well, because they've done lots of fast-paced but very, very impactful stuff using this method.
So in terms of sort of taking us to the end here, Perry, I think the immediate question in my mind, and mindful that we've got still nearly 30 people on here. Sensible. What's the most sensible way to get started? You wouldn't want to do everything at the same time.
No,
would you?
Absolutely not. No, not at all. I mean, I think having people like us around to help you get your sort of methods right and the topic you want to tackle and how you get going. So I think we would like to offer that kind of support to people who were interested enough that they wanted to try this out. I think that's the first port of call, which is we can accelerate how quickly you go from understanding this to being able to do it. So that's I think a good starting point. But it comes back to the problem, identifying the problem. If you're thinking, there's one thing that actually I've come up with in my mind that I think is a really good way of trying this out, because it's perhaps got a short time frame, it's perhaps been tried before and not quite worked, and you want to try something different. If you can identify that kind of problem, find somebody who owns that problem and say, hey, how about we do a bit of a Salford City Council here, and we create a squad and work with Northwest employers, and they can help us guide through the process, but we can deliver something quickly and see if it is a method that we can apply to bigger projects or bigger issues. I'd start there, thinking about the problem and finding somebody who can like create the space and hold that issue for you so that you can create a squad and try it out. That would be as good a start as any, and maybe talk to people like Salford and Leeds City Council and the people at Tameside who have who've been, you know, sort of implemented this kind of thing, and see where we can go from there. But yeah, I'd start by thinking, what's the problem that we could actually use this for? That would be a good place to start.
And again, just looking at, again, we've had another comment from somebody asking about Agile for ICT projects.
Oh yeah.
You know, and again, I'll just read your question out if that's okay. Can anyone on the webinar, Perry yourself, give any good non-ICT examples?
Yes. So Salford's new centre for vulnerable young adults was built using this method. So that wasn't a technology solution at all. That was built by a squad of people. Salford have been using it in some of their COVID-19 responses. Leeds City Council have just started to do some stuff both in homelessness and in COVID responses, I know. So yeah, they built a new graduate scheme for the council using this kind of method. Right. Some of my other clients have used it in non-ICT as well. So all good.
Sorry, Perry, are you still there? I'm just, my internet might
be
fuzzy.
I am. I'll take it off share screen because I was a bit worried. That's all right.
Yeah, we all jammed then. I thought, have my kids put YouTube back on? You know, who's their game while I'm doing this webinar?
Yeah.
Right. So I think just trying to wrap this up then, as long as the terminology, because the purpose of this webinar, for those of you that are watching it, whether live or later on, is to enable us to not let the terminology get in the way of the thing that we need to deliver. Yeah. So we've gone through, just as a bit of a recap, we've gone through the difference between the waterfall, a traditional, what we'll call a traditional project, Perry, and an agile project. We've gone through the difference between almost a hierarchical team and a squad that's got, you know, everybody's a project manager, everybody's a leader. It's that sort of that magic distributed leadership thing that colleagues in other sectors talk quite a lot about. We've explored areas that this works, areas where it doesn't work. We've even ventured near politics without getting too political, which I'm pleased about. And also try to make a little bit of sense around, you know, where do you start? And actually, again, you know, got a colleague sharing at the GM level the HROD conference last year. I remember that. It was done by a squad, and I know that the Greater Manchester HR Director team has a number of squads that are getting on and delivering some really good stuff.
True. True.
In terms of next then, so if somebody does want some further help, Perry, do you just want to maybe a minute on that, and then we can close?
So I think we as in Northwest Employers and I are convinced this is going to be a useful thing both in COVID-19 responses and beyond. So we don't want to keep it away from any opportunity that could help you. So you know, we'd like to offer kind of learning programs that could work using this kind of approach, and materials that can help you with the stages and understanding the process, so that you can start to adopt it and build it up. So I think we would provide that level of comfort and competence and confidence, I guess, to get people going. I didn't spend much time virtually, and we do it small and tight, but I think we'd like to give people the chance to get really comfortable with this and try it out. So any I think items of interest can come, I think, through UCAS, and we'll talk about how we could support people and just help them make some savings, create some space and capacity, and just try some new things that can create some breakthrough solutions. I think we'd all like to see that happen now.
Perry, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for everyone else for bearing with us. We are, like I said at the beginning, we are learning how to do this stuff, but I certainly hope that this hour has been a useful use of your time. You've learned, well, we've myth-busted Agile, and hopefully you know a lot more about it now than you did when we started. Before I go, a bit of a plug for next week. We're doing a resilience webinar with Matt, who was asking us a question earlier on, and Matt's also developed a really tidy resource for us around the anti-baddies, which I think is quite good. My kids love it. It's a printable, you can take it out, colour it, do all the various quizzes and bits and pieces on it. Really good little tool. And then we're also going to be hosting a webinar with one of our associates who does this on a day-to-day basis, managing virtual teams and homeschooling. Now, I think I need this particular one, so I might be just asking lots and lots of questions just for my own kids. But yeah, we really hope you can join us for those 2 webinars next week. And thank you everyone for your time.
Thanks very much for sticking with us, everybody.
Have a good, peaceful and safe Easter weekend. And yeah, we'll see you at the next one.
Well said, Cash. Well said.
Bye-bye.
I'll stop recording.